So hello, and welcome to our first Head Talk. My name is Tim Thomas, and I'm the head of school, and I'm privileged today to be joined by our new deputy head of school.
Hello, I'm Lee Miller, and it is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
So this Head Talk is the first of what we hope will be a series of presentations that we want to make to the community. And the purpose of these is to have an opportunity to discuss some of the school-wide things that we're doing. So we have parent-principal forums, and we have other opportunities for parents to get information about things that are happening in specific parts of the school. But we've really lacked a forum where we can discuss things that are really whole school oriented. And we want to solve that through these. So in some of the future Head Talks, we'd like to take a deep dive into some concepts like literacy education or mathematics education, things where the approach that MIS takes might look a little bit different than what we know from when we were in school or what other schools do. But today we're starting the first one with a big project that is very school-wide, and that is something that is called the School Improvement Groups. And so we're going to tell you today a little bit about how those started, we're going to talk about where we are right now, and we're going to talk about what we hope to achieve with those.
One of the best parts about our school improvement groups is that they're teacher-led. And this is very reflective of best practice. Educational researchers study the influence of various factors on student achievement. And interestingly, they have found that teacher collective efficacy, which means teachers' belief in their own ability to make change at a school, actually has the strongest impact on student achievement. And so that's exactly what we're doing here at MIS.
And to talk a little bit about where this all came from, we go through a process that's called accreditation. So in case you don't know what accreditation is when external organizations check on the quality of the school. So it's a kind of quality check from outside. So we are accredited by two organizations. One of them is global, and they really focus on international schools, and that's called Council of International Schools, or CIS. The other one is a US-based organization that we often refer to as NEASC. NEASC is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. So these two organizations come to our school, which they did just a few weeks ago at the end of September. And at that time, a number of educational professionals came to MIS, they sat in classrooms, they talked with our leaders, and they discovered if we meet all of their quality standards, and this time we were doing something brand new. So because we've done accreditation many times, and so they already know that we meet the basic quality standards, they've allowed us to be a pilot school for a new protocol, and that's called Pathway 2. So Pathway 2 is something they've designed to challenge schools who are already meeting all of their basic standards to go further. And what Pathway 2 does is it asks the school to plan how the school would like to change for the future, how we'd like to improve, make a plan for that improvement, try to do the improvement, and then they come in and give us feedback on whether or not we were successful with that. So that's been a really dynamic new process for us that has really challenged us to be better as a school. And that was what gave rise to this whole school improvement group process.
And the 5 areas that we chose to focus on last year were consistency of excellent pedagogy, which was really about bringing our teaching and learning policy to life. We focused on student feedback to teachers, so teachers could adjust and align their instruction based on the feedback they were hearing from students. We looked carefully at a computational and structured thinking curriculum, which means a common approach to problem solving. We also looked deeply at language learning here at MIS. And finally, we did a deep dive into universal design for learning, which is really about designing learning proactively to provide multiple access points for students.
So those were the 5 from last year, and those are the 5 that we got feedback on during the meetings that took place at the end of September. And now for the coming year, we are looking at doubling the number of those groups, and we have 10 individual groups that are working on different areas for the future. So because there are 10, to provide coherency, we've really grouped them into 3 big domains. So the first of those domains is planning for learning. So we have 3 groups who are looking at how we plan to have the most effective learning opportunities possible. The second one is innovating learning. And so we have 4 groups who are looking at how we're improving what we're doing in the classroom for our students. And the third and final one is systems that support learning. So this is looking at how all the things that we're trying to do to be better teachers for our students can be supported throughout the school, they can be spread, they can be a part of the way that MIS works. And so we've grouped our 10 groups into these 3 categories, and that's helping to organize our thinking.
Planning for learning is our first category, and this is something that teachers spend a lot of time doing. Our first group that falls into this category is a continuation from last year, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL for short. And this group is really working together to design learning that looks and feels different. So teachers are setting learning goals, but then they're designing multiple pathways for students to reach that learning goal. And we're really putting those pathways in the hands of students. We want them to make the choice. We want them to own their learning and determine which pathway is best for them. So an example of that might be if a class is studying human rights, the teacher has a very clear goal in mind, that students will understand human rights and perhaps they will advocate and protect others' human rights. But the way that students get to that goal will be different. They might read articles, they might talk to experts in the field, they might watch videos, they might watch news recordings, and the way they show their learning also can be different. We know that students process in different ways, and so we want them to have the opportunity to share their learning in different ways. So perhaps they'll have a discussion with other students. Some might prefer to write individually or develop a creative presentation. There are many options within UDL, and that's very exciting work that's happening. In fact, that's our biggest school improvement group. We have over 50 teachers who've decided to focus on this area this year, and that's across disciplines, across age groups. So that's really exciting work that we're doing. The second area that we're focusing on in planning for learning is real world and authentic assessment. This actually sits inside UDL because we're thinking about different ways that students can showcase their learning. Teachers are studying project-based assessment, problem-based assessment, scenario-based assessment. And you're probably wondering what that means, because for us as adults, we think about assessment and we think about tests, right? We think about multiple choice or short answer, and that's how we showed our learning. But we know that learners can showcase their learning in different ways. So an example might be that if a class is studying about energy, rather than taking a test on energy, they might think about energy in their own context. How much energy is their family consuming in a month? What types of energy are they consuming? And what is a proposal for how they might reduce their energy consumption? So we're really trying to create authentic, real-world opportunities for students to take their learning and transfer it into the world. Our final group related to planning for learning is our IB learning progressions. At MIS, we have the opportunity to be part of the IB, and that involves a team of educational researchers who are always ensuring that we're staying on the cutting edge of education. And they have asked MIS to pilot some of their new learning skills progressions, and this is a real honor for us as a school. So some of our PYP and MYP teachers are reviewing these new progressions, analyzing them, giving feedback to the IB about what the strengths are and what might be missing, and they're testing them out in their classrooms because we really don't know if something is going to work until we use it with students. And so that's what they're doing this year in this group, and they're gathering feedback that we'll provide to the IB before these progressions are released.
Thank you. So the second group is one of my favorites, and that's where we're looking at innovating what we're doing in the classroom. And the very first in that list is probably not a surprise. So I imagine that all of you are hearing about artificial intelligence as well. So artificial intelligence is something that is arising rapidly. And when we think about something like ChatGPT, that came onto the market just like a year ago. And already it's made so many things possible, and it's changed the way we think about the work that students might do. And as we're thinking about artificial intelligence, we know that we need to be preparing ourselves both to harness the opportunities that this makes possible for our teachers and our students. And additionally, we need to be thinking about the threats that it brings. So how are we going to control for the ways that students might use it in the assessment process or in the thinking process? So we have a really brilliant group of teachers who are engaging in the first instance in research, and they're looking at what experts are saying about the opportunities that artificial intelligence brings, also the ways that teachers and schools need to respond to the tools that are readily available to students. We're also beginning to identify some early tools that we would like to pilot and try out in a few small contexts, and that we might then spread out later in a more universal way across the school. But we're hoping that by the end of the year, we have a better sense of what we would like to do with artificial intelligence with where it stands right now, and also be more prepared for how artificial intelligence might change in the future and how we can prepare ourselves for those changes. So that group is doing really cutting edge work. They're contacting the IB, they're contacting other professionals and trying to learn what can we do to support our students to make the most of artificial intelligence and also to guard against the possible threats. The second group is similar. This group is also doing something very cutting edge and very interesting, and that is the group who's looking at educating change makers. So we're going to have a student-led solutionary summit here at MIS in the spring, where we anticipate that students from 15 to 20 schools will come together, and those are students who are passionate about bringing about change in the world. And before we have that solutionary summit, we are engaging in work to train our teachers, to support our students, to understand what do you do to bring about change in the world. So it's not about going out and gluing yourself to the pavement. It's not about action right away. It's about understanding. So we know that if students want to engage in changing the world, they first have to really understand the subject in which they would like to bring about change. So just as an example, if a student is really interested in renewable energy, there's so much that a student needs to understand about the science behind renewable energy, about the economics of renewable energy, about the geography of renewable energy. And without all of that knowledge, action is really uninformed. So what we're trying to help students to understand and what we're trying to prepare teachers for is what are the steps that you can take to prepare yourself to be in an informed position to bring about sensible, well-informed change in our planet. And I really support this. I really do think many of our students are passionate about change in lots of different areas of social issues, environmental issues. They really want to be agents of a better future, but we need to help them along the way to understand how you do that. So that's a very important group who's doing some very exciting work, and we would love to have participation from our community in the Solutionary Summit that we're hosting in the spring.
And would you say that the Changemakers is really a science-focused group, or does it extend into other disciplines as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. An example of how it extends into lots of different subjects would be mathematics. So I know there's a math teacher who's involved in the group who's been thinking about how she can use data science and statistics to help students understand how to analyze something like renewable resources, to be able to create good arguments, to truly understand the benefit that renewable resources might have, and the limitations that they have. So to be really intellectually honest about the potential of these resources. But in order to do that, there's a whole lot that you have to know. And that includes science, it includes mathematics, it includes the humanities, it includes the arts. So we're really looking at how we're embedding these ideas into subjects all across the school. So a fourth group is a continuing group, and that's the group who's working on structured and computational thinking. So structured and computational thinking sounds a little complicated, and it is a little bit, but hopefully as a parent at our school, you've heard us talk about ATL, approaches to learning. So this is how we're teaching kids to understand how they learn and how they can make their learning more effective. And we think that's one of the key things we have to do as a school for our students, is help them to learn how they learn. And one of the 5 skills clusters in ATL is called thinking skills. And most of us as teachers were not taught to teach thinking skills. That's not something we were prepared to do as we were preparing to be teachers. So we really need to put into teachers' hands some concrete examples of what thinking skills are. And that's what structured and computational thinking is. It's specific models for helping students to understand how they can define a problem, how they can break down a complex problem into smaller pieces, how they can understand those pieces, and how they can design a solution to address that now well understood problem. So this is putting tools into the hands of teachers to support them to teach students these thinking skills. That's important for us to do. It's important for us because we really believe that ATLs are important, and it's important because it's specific. It's putting something very specific in front of students and in front of teachers that can make them more powerful thinkers. And the final group in this cluster is language learning. This is one that's very close to my heart. I too am a language teacher, and I really am convinced that language learning is a really integral part of an international education. But there are some barriers. So for example, as an IB school in the MYP, our students have up to 11 subjects that they're taking. And I really appreciate that the IB is a broad curriculum and that students have to learn all these different things. But at the same time, the impact that has is that any one subject can only be taught a few times a week because there's just so much time in a student's schedule. And for languages which need frequent exposure, that really is a barrier, and it's something that makes effective language teaching challenging. Another barrier is that as more and more tools are available, and some of those are artificial intelligence tools, students sometimes don't really see the reason to continue to memorize vocabulary and memorize the way verbs are conjugated. So sometimes the motivation isn't there for language learning as well, because they think, I can pop this into Google and find out what it means. So we're thinking, and particularly this group, is really looking carefully at what can really good 21st century language instruction look like in a school. And at one level, that's looking in the classroom at what does the pedagogy look like? How can the teacher engage the students in learning that's really engaging and motivating? But it's also raising that view a little bit to what could the language pathways through our school look like? How might the courses that we offer in the course of a student's time at MIS reflect language learning differently? So I know among many things, they're thinking about, well, what if we had an 8th grade drama taught in French? Would that be a motivating way to make French learning really feel relevant and special and engaging for students? And that's not necessarily the answer, but that's the kind of thing they're looking at. So everything from in the classroom, what can we do? But also structurally as a school, how could we adapt language learning to the evolving needs of the students we have today and the context in which they understand themselves and understand what's important to learn. So those are our 4 innovating learning groups.
I think the language learning group is particularly interesting to me. I'm just beginning my journey of learning German, and absolutely, there's so many different ways that you can learn, and there are different ways for everyone. And parents, we know that many of you are multilingual learners as well, and you've had different experiences learning languages. We would love to hear your input in this group. If this is an area that particularly interests you, we will be reaching out to you and asking for you to join some of these conversations and share how language learning can look and how we can continue to support this here at MIS. As Tim said, the last area of our school improvement groups is focused on the systems that support learning. And the first system that we are looking deeply at is our teacher growth and appraisal framework. And of course, we already have an appraisal and growth framework, but it is a bit more traditional, and it's focused on observations and feedback from administrators. And we know that teachers grow and learn in so many different ways. And so we want a framework that is going to support all of those ways. We know that teachers collaborate together, they learn from each other, they learn from their students, and they need choice and ownership in how they're developing as teachers. A quality teacher is one who is constantly growing and constantly responding to the students in front of them. And so the teachers in this group are doing a lot of research. They're looking at what is the latest information about teacher growth and teacher evaluation and supervision, what really benefits a teacher. They're looking at different schools. Many different schools are adopting new models right now, and so we're learning from each other. And our goal is to propose a new model for teacher growth and appraisal this year. Our second system relates to the spaces. As many of you know, we are well underway in building our new learning nexus. This is very exciting for all of us here, students and teachers alike. We know that potentially this space can transform learning. It can optimize a student as the agent of their own learning, that they can be more self-directed. They might have different opportunities in a space that really breaks down the barriers of traditional classroom walls. This is something that many schools are looking into, and so we are talking to a lot of schools around the world and seeing what different schools have tried, how they're being used. What we don't want is a new space that just continues to be used in the same way. And so this group particularly is looking at the usage model. How will this space transform learning at MIS? And that's really what we're working towards. And it's very exciting, and that will be in place next year. And our final system that we're looking at is how we document and share curriculum with one another. Of course, we have curriculum here at MIS, but right now it lives in many different places, and it's not in touch with students, parents, or teachers who don't teach that discipline, which makes it very challenging for us to integrate across disciplines. It makes it very hard for students and parents to get a full landscape of what learning looks like at MIS. And so that's something that we're working toward. We are inputting our curriculum, transferring, moving, enhancing our curriculum into a platform called Toddle. And this will provide you as parents with a clearer window into what learning looks like here at MIS. Although we have many different areas of focus, we are actually all utilizing the same process for learning. As you can see here, we started the year just as we would with students. What are our questions? What do we want to know about this particular area? And where are we headed? What do we want the intended impact to be on learning? What will our success criteria be? How will we know that we've achieved what we've set out to achieve? Right now in October, most groups are deep into the research phase. So they are creating surveys, they are reading, they are talking to experts. We've had a number of guests from outside organizations and universities come to meet with teachers to help us understand the landscape. From here, we're going to be prototyping and experimenting. So we need to see how some of these ideas work in practice. So teachers will be trying them out with their students, with other community members, reflecting, refining, and coming to conclusions around these areas of focus. Ultimately, our goal is to share our learning and to embed our learning in practice at MIS.
I think an important thing to explain as well is this is the work that we're engaged in during early release. So that once a month when students go home at 2 o'clock, we don't go home at 2 o'clock. This is the time we have to work together on these kinds of goals. And also for the couple of professional development days we have during the year. So we had one in September. We'll have one more in November on Buß- und Bettag. This is how we spend that time. So we're working on improving the school for the future, for the near future, and for further down the road. And that's also the time that we're also addressing any individual student needs that there might be. So there's a lot going on. When the students walk away for an early release or for a professional development day, this place is a beehive of activity with the teachers and the staff. So finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the intended impacts of all of this work. So first and foremost, we're hoping to identify the opportunities to make specific improvements in teaching and learning in the MIS context. So these groups really have the task of trying to figure out what concretely can we do differently in the future that will have a benefit for the well-being of students, for their learning, for their social engagement at school, to make sure that what we're doing is relevant and engaging and that it helps them to succeed. The second thing is they are also already at the same time working on piloting or trialing in a small way some of the ideas that they have. So we don't want to make huge investments in materials or processes if we don't know that they're going to be valuable within this context. So another thing that these groups are doing is identifying the possibilities for trying out a new tool or trying out a new method, maybe in one or just a couple of classrooms, and gathering data from those trials so that we can make a bigger decision about further implementing those things across the school. The third step is that in those cases where we think the pilots were successful, we want to define the networks, which in some cases are existing networks that we have, existing ways that we support each other in the school, but also we might have to develop all new structures in order to make these things spread throughout the school. So something that's very important to me is that when students are at MIS, that regardless of what class they're in, while there might be some differences in the way one teacher teaches to another because of the strengths that teacher brings to the classroom, that there are also some unified ways that we teach across the school, that there's an MIS way of doing things that students can dependably expect regardless of what grade level they're in or regardless of which teacher they have, that there's really a way that we do things here. And so that's why it's important that we have specific ways of spreading good practice all through the school. And finally, a big goal of this, and what we've seen happening already, is we want to make sure that MIS is a learning organization. And that might sound obvious at first, that schools are learning organizations because kids go there to learn, but I think our goal is even bigger than that. I think we want to be a school that is continuously improving, that is continuously asking ourselves questions about the work we're doing with students, a school that's recognizing that students are changing, that the demands of the world are changing, and that we are continuously thinking that way, we're continuously seeking to grow, that we're building structures in the school that support all of us to continuously get better at being MIS. So that culture of continuous growth is a final big piece of this process. So the feedback that we've gotten so far from the inspectors or visitors who were here in September was extremely positive. They looked closely at the 5 groups that existed last year, and they were really enthusiastic about the engagement of the teachers, about the changes that had already taken place in the practices of teachers in the classroom because of the work of those groups. And they were very optimistic about how that would carry into the future. So really, the inspection or the visit, it was a huge motivator for us. Such positive feedback, and really good to hear from people outside the school that they think we're on the right track. And many of them afterwards asking if they can take pieces of it back to their home schools or to other places. So that was really positive. So those are our school improvement groups. So you might hear your children coming home and talking about something that a teacher's trialing in class, or you might hear about them providing feedback to their teachers on what works and what doesn't work for them in the classroom. And all of those things are arising from these school improvement groups. So I hope that was a helpful overview and that gives you a sense of the work that we're doing, of the goals that we have. And I should say, this really all falls into the purview of Lee Miller, who is our deputy head of school. So Oliver Hartwright, the previous deputy head, was really working closely with these groups last year when we were doing this for the very first time. And Lee familiarized herself with these groups already while she was still in Chile, was joining virtually some of the work that was happening. And she's really hit the ground running and has been so far a really powerful supporter of the leaders of these groups to make sure they're on track, to make sure they have what they need in order to do this work, and to encourage them to really make this time useful. So Lee, I appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. This is an opportunity for us to tell you about our school improvement groups, but we want the conversation to continue. We're excited about this work, and we welcome your questions. We welcome your interest and your contributions, so please don't hesitate to ask us how it's going, and we'll be happy to share with you.
And I think you received that you can pose questions if you want to by writing to communications@mis-munich.de. And do we already have a few questions? We have a few questions. All right. Yes, so how can parents get involved with the work of these groups?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. I already mentioned the language SIG group. That is one where we are particularly interested in your expertise and experience as language learners yourself, and you might have experienced language learning in a way that we haven't thought about, and we would love to know more about that. We will be formally inviting parents into this group, but if it's an area of interest for you, please let us know. Obviously, our other groups, I'm sure, have interest for you as well, our Nexus and Universal Design for Learning, Computational and Structured Thinking. If there is a particular area of interest, or if you feel like you have expertise in an area from your place of work and you'd be willing to support us and engage in conversations around that focus area, please don't hesitate to share that information. You can always write to myself, you can write to Tim, and we will find ways for you to contribute to this exciting school change.
Are these one-year projects? What are the timelines? Yeah, very good question. You want me to take this one?
Sure.
Yeah, so the work is a little bit messy. So that's why some of the groups who started last year are continuing into this year. And I could imagine that some of those could continue for 3 to 5 years. When I think about Universal Design for Learning, for example, that is a sea change in how teachers think about how they're addressing the diverse needs of students in their classrooms. And so that group, for example, has invited a couple of consultants who come to the school and are working with small groups of teachers to help them advance their expertise in Universal Design for Learning. But it's big. It's a big change in how you plan for learning, how you execute learning in the classroom, how you respond to students' learning. And so I can easily imagine that Universal Design for Learning is going to take five years for us to feel like it's really richly embedded into the practice of teachers every day. Some of the other groups have been able to make significant progress in a shorter amount of time. When I think about the teacher appraisal group, I think we have a goal there that they would already have a concrete proposal by the end of this year. So they're on more of a timeline where we're expecting a more concrete outcome to come out of the work they're doing in a specific amount of time. So one of the things we'll have to do as a school is really monitor the progress of these groups as they move through that cycle that Lee showed you, and think about, when does it make sense to exit a project, to say, well, that's finished, that's complete, or it's moved to a place in its development where we can shift it to a different format. And when are the opportunities, because I can clearly see this happening, that new projects need to become a part of the structure. So that's something we're thinking about very much right now, is how do we keep the whole thing moving, and how do we make sure that the work that each group is doing is relevant and impactful and hasn't run its course just yet.
Absolutely, and that's why we've intentionally built some pieces into the process. So teachers have already identified what their success criteria is. How will we know when we've reached that? And how will we embed this? We don't want any of this learning to disappear. We want to embed it into the way that we do things here at MIS. And so that's a conversation that's happening all of the time. We also don't want these 10 groups to continue to function separately. We know that there are so many overlaps in learning. For example, the AI group is already starting to talk with the curriculum group. How can we bring these together? The Changemaker group is already in conversation with the computational and structured thinking group. What can problem solving look like across these areas? And so that's something that we are promoting throughout the year, is conversation and awareness of what's happening across groups so that we can look for opportunities for merging.
Are there any more questions? Okay, no more at the moment. So if you do have a question that's arisen because of this discussion, we really welcome it. So please don't think that you can't submit the question because the session has ended. We'd be happy to respond to your question in another way. But if you've given us your time today to listen to this, then I really appreciate that. I know that parents are very busy. The vast majority of our parents lead very busy lives. So if you've taken the time to listen to this, then we really appreciate your time. And I hope it's been worthwhile and has given you some insight into an important process at our school. And as I said, we plan to do new episodes of the Head Talks, perhaps about every 6 weeks. And we want to try to address questions that our parents have. So another thing that you could do is send us suggestions for topics. So if there's something that you're wondering about in terms of your child's experience at MIS, then that you can also send to communications@mis.munich-munich.de, and we would be happy to include your suggestions in future episodes.
Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, and goodbye.